All right, so Chapter 7 discusses global markets. And once again, I think the book does a nice job. I thought I might put a little bit of structure on this by focusing on the different areas that the book covered in that chapter. First, the chapter is organized as marketing in a borderless world, performing a global environmental scan, and comparing global entry strategies. Now, this is a little bit more important chapter because with the new administration in place, there's been more of a focus on perhaps a border-based world and a little bit less of an emphasis on the borderless world. So let's look at the U.S.'s top trade partners. Of course, if you look through history, the top trade partners for the U.S. has remained relatively consistent, with most of the adjustments being having to do with oil. And that is that as the U.S. has become less and less dependent on foreign oil, the trade partners' total dollars has shifted a little bit. In 2016, China is our #1 trade partner, followed by Canada and Mexico. And of course, Canada and Mexico are influenced by NAFTA. And of course, you know that the federal government has been in the process of arguing that NAFTA now needs to be renegotiated. We want to be very careful when we do this because understand that 2 of our 3 largest trade partners are involved in that agreement. So what does this table actually tell us? Well, it gives us the values for imports and exports added together. Understand that these countries represent 66% or 2/3 of the U.S. imports, these 10 countries, and 62% of all U.S. exports in goods. It shows us that the top trade partners for the U.S. tend to remain constant over the years, and that these particular countries constitute a huge amount of our foreign markets. So why go global? Why should a company bother to go global? Why don't we just sell in the United States? Why does someone like the Ford Motor Company want to sell global? Well, one reason, of course, is you're being taxed in your domestic market, and so your solution is let's go overseas where maybe there's less competition, or we can attack the competition. So, for instance, Mercedes and BMW have attacked our domestic markets. Maybe our solution should be to attack the German markets with our automobiles. Perhaps I might go global because there might be a higher profit margin due to less competition and fewer alternatives for consumers to consider. I might go global because I need a larger customer base. I have growth. I have growth goals, and I've basically tapped out my U.S. markets, and so I'm looking for some other place to go and gain growth. Or it might be done to help the firm's dependence on one market or one country's economy. You remember in 2007 when the U.S. hit a very deep recession, the global companies were the ones that did a little bit better because all of their sales weren't tied up in the U.S. Now, there are 2 aspects of protectionism that might hinder world trade. So when we talk about world trade, there are 2 things that countries might do to limit trade. One is to produce tariffs. We recently referred to them as border taxes and not tariffs, and I'm not really sure why we changed that wording. But a tariff is an additional charge we place on goods that are imported from a foreign country. So if remember this was the story that the administration was talking about. Well, if you're going to produce automobiles in Mexico, then when we ship those to the United States, we'll put a tariff on them. Or if you're going to build those same vehicles in South Korea or China or someplace else, or products that are built in those countries, we will in fact put a tariff on them to protect our U.S. customers. Of course, what this does in reality is increase prices to the end consumer and decreases world trade. Another approach might be a quota approach, where we limit the amount of product that can be imported from a country. So we might say, well, we can import cars from Mexico, but only a certain number of them. And so what that does is that limits supplies, which once again turns into a scenario where in many cases it increases prices and decreases world trade. Protectionism helps local domestic producers and companies, but that comes at a cost, and the cost tends to be higher prices for the individuals in that company. So if I'm going to put a tariff on everything that is imported into my country, at the end of the day, that will result in higher prices. Now, we talk about marketing in a borderless economy. One of the big changes over the last 15 years or so has been the development of the European Union, which was 27 countries, and the idea was that the 27 European countries basically eliminated their barriers to trade. They use a common currency now called the euro, where it used to be each country had their own currency. But you might note that that recently the United Kingdom residents voted to leave the European Union, and of course that was called Brexit. The other agreement that's important for the U.S. In terms of economic integration and making a borderless economy is the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. This lifted trade barriers between Canada and Mexico and the U.S. As you know now, the U.S. government, the current U.S. government, is looking at attempting to change that NAFTA agreement. Once again, remember, these are two of our three largest trading partners. Here's an example. So with the countries that are in the European Union, of course, once again, there are 28 and not 27 because the United Kingdom is now out. Global companies have there are three basic marketing strategies for global companies. The first is an international firm. That is, basically, they are a U.S. company who extends their home marketing strategy to a foreign country. And we'll talk a little bit later on about how this can be done. A multinational firm is one that has a multi-domestic marketing strategy. So they may not only market products in foreign countries, but they may make specific products for those countries and may in fact manufacture them in those countries. And then we have transnational firms, which are truly companies with global marketing strategies with global brands.